Good afternoon. My name is Dr. Hassan. I'm an anesthetist, part of the Medico-Legal Society. And for this talk, our session is going to be on prisoners. We have two very interesting and progressive personalities going to talk to us. I know the prisons are full. I tried to get a loan of one of the prisoners' orange shirt, but orange outfit. But I was told that there is none left because there's so many prisoners in there. So we have a problem with prisoners in overcrowded prisons. The two personalities I have today are very passionate about what they do in prison reform and taking care of the health of prisoners. One is in the capacity as a member of parliament, and the other is a lawyer bringing justice and human rights to the group that is usually neglected nor highlighted in the media, and about their plight. Today in particular, because of this pandemic, the situation in prisons has become a bit of a critical issue. Our first speaker is the well-known member of parliament for Permatang Pauh, yang berhormat Nurul Izzah binti Anwar. She has been involved in the prison and the plight of the so I forgot about that. We have an issue because she couldn't make it today. As such, because of her commitments to the constituency that she has got to go back, she has actually sent us a pre-recorded video of her presentation. And as such, it will be a bit difficult for the audience to ask questions to pass to her for her answer. But the second speaker will be live. So, Jason, can we have the video of Yang Berhormat?
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Salam hormat khususnya Raja Aileen from MLSM. Yang saya hormati juga Datuk Munirah Hamid, Dr. Colin Nicholas, Encik Abdul Rashid Ismail, kesemuanya barisan panelis yang amat disegani dan dihormati, ladies and gentlemen. Now, I would like to state my great appreciation and gratitude for being invited untuk berkongsi sedikit sebanyak pengalaman dan juga pandangan saya. Dan saya akan mulakan dengan lawatan terakhir selaku anggota PAC dalam pemerintahan kerajaan yang lepas. I ended my final visit, ladies and gentlemen, as a PAC member during the PH government in Lenggeng Detention Centre, Negeri Sembilan. At the time, myself and other committee members were asked to look at the living conditions of detainees and hear the immigration's views and positions vis-a-vis economic migrants and refugees in general. Needless to say, it was quite an experience. Other than the current stance of not recognizing refugees and the unsanitary living conditions which were ripe for the spread of infectious diseases, equally concerned for the immigration department, there was, however, one piece of encouraging news in the presentation made by Malaysia's immigration. They announced at the time that in the upcoming 12th Malaysia plan, it included the upgrade of all the immigration depots across the country. However, in light of recent events, such plans to upgrade could have fallen on the wayside as the country's finances remain burdened by the shocking impact of the pandemic. It remains to be seen whether it will reappear next week in the next parliamentary sitting, but I believe events have clearly shown the urgency of upgrading and improving standards. Esteemed guests, back in June 2020, when our active case numbers were still in the 8,000s, a series of immigration depot clusters hit us all, affecting over 700 detainees across 3 depot centres. Human rights groups wrote in, bemoaning the crowded conditions and substandard sanitation that had long afflicted these centres, warning that if such conditions were not improved, such places would develop into dangerous hotbeds of infection. Fast forward 4 months, infections have spiked again. Now, from about 10,000 confirmed cases accumulated from the beginning of the year, January, up to mid-September, we are now at the brink of breaking the 30,000 mark. Within the span of a single month, this month alone, we experienced a spike of over 11,000 cases, more than we've ever had in the past 9 months. And at the heart of it is the frightening, this frightening surge is the infections that have spread like wildfire, the main cluster within our prisons. Now today, at least 7 of our carceral institutions have been compromised. The first to get the worst of it was cluster Tembok dekat Kedah, then prisons in Sabah, and now Penang. On the 27th of October, it was reported that half of all those tested in Kepayan Prison Complex in Sabah turned out to be positive. As by the 28th of October, the cumulative number of cases from this cluster stands at 1,566 cases, with cluster Tembok recording 1,679 cases and Penjara-Reman Pulau Pinang recording 455. Now, what's happening to our prisoners today is terrible, but what's even worse is the knowledge that all the suffering could have been prevented. Our prison systems have been ticking public health time bombs for years now, and with poor health services and infrastructure, overcrowded and unsanitary conditions, coupled with inadequate health personnel, it is completely unsurprising on how quickly we're seeing the virus spread behind bars and eventually into the communities. With nowhere to run, the incarcerated in these current troubling circumstances, including the wardens who are taking care of them and their families, are essentially nothing more than sitting ducks. Now, aware that something needed to be done, earlier this month, the Director General of Prisons, the Zulkifli announced an initiative to release on license minor offenders who were sentenced to less than 1 year of imprisonment, with less than 3 months left to serve. Now, this is a scheme that could involve up to 11,018 inmates, depending on their eligibility. Now, it is commendable, this move, certainly necessary to address the overcrowding, but I think it was really something that needed support from the authorities and the government from a larger scheme of things. Now, when the KDN, Menteri Dalam Negeri, Minister of Home Affairs, was questioned in Parliament in the last sitting by various members of Parliament, including myself, we asked him to ensure that prisons were adequately protected from the virus spread. This was in July this year. We were assured multiple times that the necessary SOPs were taken, were in place. Yet, look where we are now. So by neglecting to protect the health and the well-being of our vulnerable prison populations, we have failed them. Prisons should not be a death sentence. Yet, as the virus spreads insidiously behind bars, it is well on its way morphing into one. Now, early this month, an older prisoner with pre-existing health conditions was found dead in his cell in Penjara-Reman Pulau Pinang, and later upon his death was found to be COVID positive. Ladies and gentlemen, fortunately, even though there have been deaths, they have not been a major feature of our existing prison clusters. There are those who have been saved. But there's no room here for complacency. We must not continue to allow this vulnerable segment to be exposed to something that has and may cripple them for life. And we must remember, exposure to a deadly virus was never meant to be part of their punishment. We're talking about prisons in Malaysia being rehabilitative centers. So, not neglecting the fact that many innocent people also reside behind bars, those who are wrongfully convicted. Penang Institute reports that there was a high incidence of judicial errors in capital punishment in Malaysia. So we can imagine, what awaits them once they are behind bars. So overcrowding and terrible prison conditions are the truest symptoms of a larger problem. I'm sure the panelists here know far better and have been fighting very hard to ensure that the criminal justice system is improved and reformed. But moving forward, we must take stock of the limits of the incarceration system so that we may save more lives that have been lost during this pandemic. In this regard, I will always be grateful to the commitment and the time that the late Datuk B.K. Liew spent on promoting and hearing different groups to pursue reforms, specifically in my particular case, prison reforms. I had the chance to pass on a blueprint of key suggestions, which are by no means exhaustive. There's certainly more that can be added, but it was drawn up based on several suggestions given to me by officials from the Jabatan Penjara Malaysia, and it detailed a series of suggestions that can address the current prison crisis, that can improve, and of course, the specific amendments to existing laws. I invite your feedback after this. But at the center of the suggestions is the conviction that prisons should serve as centers of rehabilitation, not wanton and cruel punishment. Studies have found that those who were incarcerated were more likely to turn to criminality upon release. This is hardly surprising given the abject conditions they are typically subject to during their time behind bars. However, change will only come from a prison system that has radically shifted its approach from one that's harsh and punitive to cultivating an environment that encourages reflection and learning, growing from past mistakes. And this was, in essence, the very raison d'etre to why prisons, or what is the main charter held by the Jabatan Penjara Malaysia. Now, at the end of their sentence, they should emerge not as embittered or disempowered individuals, but rather as people who have been given lease to a second chance in life. To achieve this, we then must also implement changes so that we have a system that respects the fundamental human rights of every human being, every person behind bars, in accordance with the Nelson Mandela rules, which promotes human conditions of imprisonment, acknowledges prisoners as being continuous or part of society, and values the work of the prison staff as an important pivotal social service. To quote the United Nations, the ultimate purpose of imprisonment, the protection of society from crime, is undermined in prisons, which are overstretched and poorly managed. We must face up with the fact that our current prison system, like many other countries, like the US, for example, is characterized by cruelty. Therefore, a radical shift is needed here to center compassion and kindness in our approach to those who commit crimes in a bid to break the cycle of cruelty, partly due to poverty that may have created the environment and conditions that led them to commit the crime in the first place. And the first commendation in the blueprint was reducing overcrowding through the implementation of a number of different initiatives. One of which include low-risk prisoners, enrolling low-risk prisoners into a community-based rehabilitation and reintegration program. Now, back last year, 2019, the Malaysian Prison Department announced their commitment to releasing up to 75% of the 22,000 eligible low-risk prisoners on parole through this program by 2030. So there's a target that they made, and I'm very proud of that. According to the Ministry of Home Affairs, as of 1st July 2020, our prisons had a capacity of only 47,650 people, yet it held 60,983 inmates. In other words, an excess of 13,000 prisoners over capacity. Late last year, the JPM Director General announced that 25 out of the nation's 38 prisons were at or operating at overcapacity. Ensuring that the JPM follows through with their commitment to community-based rehabilitation and reintegration program will go a long way towards solving Malaysia's chronic overcrowding problem. Another important move includes encouraging the imposition of mandatory attendance order, which would require convicted criminals or individuals to serve community service in lieu of imprisonment. Now, this could be targeted to individuals convicted for small or petty crimes subject to the discretion of the courts. The order is part of the already existing Compulsory Attendance Act 1954 and was first proposed by the Malaysian Prison Department in 2010. The Act is also proposed to be amended to allow more minor offenders to undergo community corrections in prison. The community work can involve cleaning houses of worship or caring for the elderly in old folks' homes. Apart from that, ladies and gentlemen, the Prisons Department is also looking at additional amendments to the Prisons Act 1995 and the Prisons Regulations 2000 to allow prisoners to serve alternative sentences, including house arrest. Another important conversation is that of decriminalization, given that two-thirds of those behind bars are there for drug-related offences. Now, of course, once you commit a crime, you have to do the time, but these individuals should also be given rehabilitative treatment in dedicated centres, whether outside or inside prison, depending on the severity of the crime. And those struggling with addiction should be viewed as people who have illnesses. And therefore, the best course of action would be to treat them, not punish or risk exacerbating their condition. And this is already well accepted in Malaysia. I just think we must not operate in silos. We do need an integrated way to approach this once we accept the truth. And for how can society possibly benefit from a group of individuals who are stigmatized and disempowered? Every prisoner, they represent a household, a family that they either have to feed or they've left behind. To this aim, the Dangerous Drugs Act 1952, sections 38B and 39, may also be amended to provide an opportunity for offenders convicted of drug-related crimes to undergo harm reduction treatment and alternative sentences, replacing imprisonment for a term not less than 2 years. So encouragingly, in the last parliamentary sitting, I remember the new KDN minister reiterated his commitment to pursuing the policy of decriminalization and rehabilitation. But for the sake of our vulnerable prison population, I think it must come into fruition now, not later. I mean, we already accepted it, but we just need to move mountains and ensure there's sufficient political will to work on something that's very important in this matter of life and death. So in line with moves to prevent overcrowding, prevent needless infections of inmates and wardens alike, our stance should be firmly against imprisonment of those who violate the MCO orders, even in the lockup tahanan sementara. To echo the letter of protest sent by a group of medical professionals back in May, sending violators to any place of detention, for example, police lockups, temporary detention and remand centres, immigration detention, juvenile detention and prison is working against Malaysia's national COVID-19 health strategy, putting thousands of Malaysians at risk. So all these efforts I've listed ultimately allow us to enjoy several important benefits, including the reduction of prison congestion problems, increasing the staff to prisoner ratio to 20:1, and reduction of prison costs, which will indirectly lead to better care and management of prisoners. Now, according to the Prison Department, again, this is before inflation, it costs 38 ringgit to 41 ringgit per day for each detainee, which adds up to an estimated 2.5 million ringgit per year. Secondly, Malaysian prisons must immediately upgrade their existing health infrastructure. Before COVID-19, there was a problem of latent tuberculosis, TB, in Kajang prison. Unfortunately, given the rise here, which includes the rise of prison clusters, it would appear that even with prior experience with controlling the spread of diseases in the past, it hasn't been sufficient as a warning for Malaysian prisons or improving their SOPs perhaps because the lack of funds and the lack of healthcare staffers. So we do need to help them step up their game by focusing on solving this problem. In our blueprint, we also call for the Malaysian Prison Department to be involved in every policy change integrated with the Ministry of Health, and that the quality of prison clinics should be improved to the level of national health clinics. In October last year, former Minister of Health, Dr. Zulkifli admitted there existed a problem of a shortage of doctors in prisons, but at least it was a start to addressing this problem. And the mental health of inmates, this is another factor, must also be an important part of any upgrades to the existing health infrastructure. Apart from ensuring inmates with mental health concerns get the support they need through dedicated officers, medicine which has not expired, we could also potentially look into establishing a protocol of cooperation between Malaysian Prisons Department and NGOs such as Defenders Malaysia. Furthermore, the upgrades should also include ensuring prisoners with special needs, such as those fighting addiction, are given the necessary support they need. I mentioned this. Now, I want to address these efforts, all this that we've mentioned, will contribute to lowering the rate of recidivism. And I know Malaysia's rate is small, is low, according to the Prisons Department, but I think we can certainly do more. And it makes it that much easier for them to return to society. There was a report by a Boston consulting group providing therapeutic treatment for addiction actually leads to reduction of recidivism by 45%. And lastly, we recommended the strengthening efforts to rehabilitate prisoners within and outside the prison complex. And this involves moving to facilitate the inmate's social reintegration upon release. Now, this can come in many forms, from mentorship programs to expanding in-house TVET programs. And I believe it's there. It's just, it needs to be done in a more holistic manner to address the thousands that are affected. In the US and Germany, pilot programs have been launched involving the mentoring of younger inmates by their older counterparts behind bars. The program operates on the recognition that individuals below 25 are more likely to be impulsive, which can often land them to trouble with the law. However, these same individuals are more receptive and have the greater potential to learn from their past mistakes, unlearn bad habits, and adapt and adopt healthier ones. Through this program, selected young inmates are required to undergo a rigorous process of self-reflection, mentorship, and study. So I think it's important for us to look at prisons, and bring it up to speed with the needs of the 21st century. It's really wonderful already because the core of our prison department is rehabilitation. So I think it's just extending that forward to have a far more conducive environment for eventual reintegration. So it's a good idea for prison programs to develop soft skills for prisoners to facilitate reintegration, as I mentioned. And of course, even the staffers, instead of the larger pool of training, should also include anger management programs and other therapy for even sex offenders. According to a study conducted by BCG, again, prisons in the US have successfully reduced their residency rate by 51% after introducing therapy to control anger to their inmates. Ladies and gentlemen, as Nelson Mandela once said, it is said that no one truly knows a nation until one has been inside its jail or jails. And that's how we should be and shall be judged. So akhir kata, saya berharap beberapa pandangan ini dapat diambil kira. Saya mohon maaf sekali lagi kerana tidak dapat bersama secara live. Hari ini, Alhamdulillah, antara permohonan yang kita akan lunaskan di Permatang Pauh adalah menyerahkan sebuah sampan yang diimpikan oleh Pak Latif, our Thai Corps, veteran nelayan yang mempunyai sampan terdahulu yang terlalu usang. So I again, as I mentioned to Raja Irene, dapatan daripada program kita hari ini yang akan dimuatkan dalam sidang Kamar Khas, insyaAllah, in terms of the findings, resolutions, in terms of if you agree with me, of course, the key suggestions and amendments that need to be made, dan insyaAllah ini akan menuntut pihak Kementerian Dalam Negeri untuk menjawab secara rasmi. Semoga kita mampu memperbaiki tahap kehidupan yang lebih berkualiti untuk segmen-segmen tertentu. Ramai di luar sana yang membolehkan segala usaha ini mencapai objektifnya. And of course, you know, this is not an easy time. I am sure many segments are suffering, and we're seeing so many people losing jobs, and this will only translate into a far more weakened, vulnerable segments. And that's why I feel that perhaps it is also a challenge, a call to action for us to not just look inwards, but also try to find ways where we can offer a helping hand. Again, thank you, MLSM. You know, it's such an important forum. I really feel very happy I could be part of this, and I look forward to your next session. Aileen tells me you will have one particular focus on mental health, but again, please let me know the resolution. This will be something that I will carry on forward through my speech in the second chamber. So terima kasih banyak-banyak dan saya berharap dapat memberikan maklum balas. It is a good point to discuss and hear your thoughts. Sekian daripada saya, wabillahi taufiq wal hidayah. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Terima kasih.
Thank you, Yang Berhormat. Because it was a pre-recorded video, and so the audience cannot ask questions. But if there are any specific questions directed specific to YB, I'm sure MLSM can direct to YB and put the answers on our webpage. Otherwise, some of the questions that were put up just now, I think Encik Rashid can later on give us some pointers to the answers to the questions that were put up. Our next speaker is Encik Abdul Rashid Ismail, who is the managing partner of a boutique litigation law firm. I'm trying to figure out what a boutique litigation law firm means, at Rashid and Zulkifli. He is an active human rights worker, lawyer, and worked on constitutional rights. And he was also the past president of the National Human Rights Society, HAKAM. And he is also part of the Bar Council Human Rights Committee for many years. He's passionate about issues about mandatory health sentences, and also decriminalization of drugs and drug-related offenses. Other human rights issues has been fighting for the recent Orang Asli case, where his team did a pro bono work in the recent landmark case of Sagum bin Tasi, which we may ask him to give a detail later on. So, Encik Rashid, can you please tell us your views on prison reforms?
Thank you, Dato, for the introduction. Thank you so much, MLSM, for inviting me today. So I have prepared some slides that I would like to share with everyone. What COVID-19 does is basically showed us that there is an urgent need to reform the Malaysian prisons. The problems have existed even before today, but there is a very slow approach to be taken by the government in dealing with these issues. YB Nurul Izzah has actually cited the various clusters in Malaysia. I'm not going to repeat what she has said, but what I want to share with you today is basically the issues facing the Malaysian prisons and how it affects the vulnerable as well as the poor section of the society. So let's start with the categories of prisoners. Who are they? We have unconvicted prisoner, convicted prisoner, dero prisoners. I just want to highlight the issue on unconvicted prisoner. This prisoner, they are basically those individuals who are on remand being charged with a crime or an offense or awaiting trial. It's either pending investigation or they've been charged and awaiting trial. Why are they in remand? There are two reasons. First is that they they have been charged for an offense that is serious, whereby bail is not allowed to be given to them. Second is that they can't afford to pay the bill. So what it does is that this prison system shows that those who can't afford, who has no money, will be severely affected. So a lot of individuals on remand, they are basically those individuals who can't afford to pay bail. Do the prisoners have rights? Certainly. They're protected by Article 5.1. Article 5.1 in our federal constitution protects the right for prisoners. It provides the right to health. But what I want to share with you is that the importance of treating these prisoners with dignity. Why I say dignity? Because they are human beings like us. They make one mistake, two mistakes, they're in prison, but they are not subhuman. So if we do not treat our prisoners with dignity, then how could they come back to the society later on, trying to reintegrate with the society? So it is important when we think about prisoners' rights, we must also think about treating them with dignity. Obviously, I just want to show you there are some statutes and regulations pertaining to prisoners' rights and also regulations. And these are some of the examples of the regulations, for example, vaccination, medical examination, and there's, as you can see, YB Nurul Izzah has mentioned about United Nations Standard Minimum Rules for Treatment of Prisoners, which is known as Nelson Mandela Rules. And Malaysia has consistently said that they have adhered to these standards. But I think I will show you that Suhakam has come out and showed that there are areas where we still have not complied with the international standards. In 2017, Suhakam prepared a report, a very, very detailed report on the right to health in prison. And they have identified problems in Malaysian prisons. And they have also recommended reforms. What I want to say is this: 2017, we have already had this report that has been given to the government. And today, because we are not able to implement this reform, we are facing a lot of problems with the prisoners being infected with COVID-19. In this course of our discussion today, I'm going to highlight 4 major issues. First, overcrowding in prison. Second, is the issue of poor medical facilities and also services. Third, in-cell condition. And fourth, sanitation situation. Okay, first issue, overcrowding in Malaysian prisons. The capacity for Malaysian prison is 45,000 inmates. We can hold 45,000 inmates. But in prison, we have about 60,000. This is figures in October 2018. I suspect it would have gone up. And out of the 60,000, almost half of the inmates are being detained with regard to drug-related offences, about 36,000. And if you can imagine looking at the space available and the numbers of inmates, clearly there are issues with, confined spaces, and SOP surely cannot be implemented effectively. There's no doubt about it. And if you look at the number of arrests for drug-related offences in our country, from 2005 until 2018, it has been on the up. You can see the blue bar basically relates to drug trafficking. The orange bar is for possession. And one of the issues that we have in our country is that the drug laws that we have are too severe, and even though it's punitive, it doesn't act as a deterrent. We have had death sentence for drug trafficking since 1975, and look at these figures. It has gone up. What it basically shows is that death sentence does not act as deterrent for drug trafficking or drug possession, for that matter. And obviously, the war on drugs has failed. And the problem with severe prisons overcrowding, I have set it out here. I am not going to repeat it for you. But what I want to say is this. Basically, the punitive approach doesn't work. There is a movement towards the decriminalization of drug use and possession in Malaysia. YB Nurul Izzah has mentioned that. We need to move and deal with drug problems as a medical issue, not in terms of punitive. There are a lot of people, I can tell you this, a lot of young people nowadays, they use drugs. You go to, how the system works is this. If you go to clubs or disco, what happens is that the police conduct a raid and they do a urine test, and what happens is that they will be tested positive for drugs, because some of them do take drugs in our country. So what happened next is that they would be sentenced to prison, at least 9 months. And the next step is that they would have drug conviction. What happened next to them? Young people. That's the end of their life. And it creates a cycle of poverty. And these disproportionately affect the poor and the marginalized. So let's move on to the next issue of lack of functional health services. The difficulty that we have, this is, I've experienced it through my interaction with my clients. So in the prison, there's only sometimes 2 or 3 doctors. And if we look at the ratio, is for every 4,612 prisoners, there are only 2 doctors available. Do you know why? Because currently the prison system is placed under, the current medical system is placed under the prison authorities. But what we need to do is to change the structure, to give it to MOH to deal with this health services. And the third issue, cells and lockups. Suhakam reported that lockups are small, poor in condition, it doesn't have proper ventilation, natural light, and like you all know, these are areas where infectious disease are going to develop. And quite frankly, in the prison, there are a lot of latent TB. And what happened is that the prison wardens are also infected by this. And what happened next is that they will bring it out to the general population. So if we don't deal with these issues, it is not just going to affect the prisoners or the warden, it will affect all of us. So I think, it is in all our interest to make sure that the prison in Malaysia is properly reformed. Next is that there is a problem with sanitation in cell. Suhakam report highlighted that we still have bucket system in prisons like Penang, Ayamole, and Taiping prison. For those who, most of you may not know what bucket system is. I still remember when I was a young 14-year-old in Ipoh, when I was riding my bicycle around Ipoh, I can see that system being used. And I am shocked when I read this report that in 2017, we still have this system. And what is also significant is that prisoners urinate and defecate in their cells. I mean, you know, with overcrowding, with this type of sanitation, I mean, of course, prisoners are going to suffer a lot of infection. So now I'm just going to highlight some of the recommendations by Suhakam. What Suhakam has suggested, which I totally agree with, is that the clinic needs to be under MOH to actually deal with all aspects of healthcare, because prison, they are not able to deal with healthcare in the way that MOH can. And the other problem is a lot of young doctors, or doctors for that matter, do not want to work in prison. A lot of them feel that working in prison is basically a punishment. What we need to do in our system is to have a proper structure where there is a career for doctors in prison healthcare. We must provide that so that it becomes very attractive for them to work in the prison center. So, you know, they can undertake research about infectious disease, and we can be a leading center for infectious disease to learn about all this research, right? So the problem is that we do not have the government is very slow in trying to assist the prison community. Sorry. And what we also want to ask is that for the Ministry of Home Affairs to improve the in-cell sanitation, we need to replace the existing bucket system, provide ventilation, lighting, and access to clean water. And for the prison departments, I just want to highlight this. We actually have very good prison officers, prison warden. From my interaction with them, they're honest and they want to do good for the community. And in fact, Nurul Izzah has actually said he's correct. We have a very low recidivism rate, and this is because we have very committed prison authorities. And I think we need to also support them, provide care for them, provide support, because they are also exposing themselves to TB. I mean, quite frankly, we do need to make sure that they are taken care of, provide opportunities, career upward mobility, also training. The other recommendation to AGC, Attorney General's Chambers, we need to review the Prison Act and regulation, because there is a discrepancy between those who are being detained in lockup and those in prison. If you recall, in the cluster in Sabah started off in a lockup in Lahad Datu that went to Tawau. The reason is simple, because there is no trained medical professional dealing with the detainees when they come into being detained at the lockup in the police station. So because of this discrepancy, it creates medical issues for the prisoners. If for those who know Tunku Zafrul, can you please ask him to provide some funding for the prison, because the prison to actually to be reformed, there must be funds. And I think you know, at the end of the day, we as a compassionate society must provide funds for our for the prison authorities to reform. Last year, 2019, I was involved in some workshops with the prison department, and they have identified various reforms to be undertaken. And in fact, they shared with Nurul Izzah. And I will tell you, they were enthusiastic. They really want to do something for the community. And what we need now is the willpower and the funding to carry through this reform. And ultimately, from my perspective, is that the struggle for reform in the prison sector is a continuous struggle, because there is this challenge between where the money is going to go. Datuk Munirah clearly said that the homeless needs the fund. The prison authorities also need the fund. So I think the struggle is real, and we do need to support our prison, because there are about 60,000 people or 70,000 people in the prison. If we don't take care of them, it can affect the rest of the general population. And ultimately, we also need to help them, because it's important for them to be reformed and to be rehabilitated in order for them to be integrated in our society. Thank you, Doctor. That's all for my presentation. I'm happy to take some questions.
Okay. Thank you very much, Rashid. We see that prison, I look at prison as a vicious positive feedback cycle. It is not a negative feedback cycle. Positive is a positive feedback cycle. What we do is we concentrate people with low health status, low income status, refugees, and things like that. We have concentrated them from the society and make them into a small section that we put them in prison. And they are vulnerable, and we amplify what they have, especially health issues. And even if we try to treat them, like what you said, there are only 2 doctors for 4,000 something prisoners. We treat them at a sub-therapeutic level. This is dangerous because it gives rise, a sub-therapeutic treatment gives rise to, especially infections like TB, they give rise to drug resistance. And we do not recognize that, and the prisoners are released to go back to society. This comes out again as a drug-resistant TB and all other infections. I mean, we are looking at COVID, but there are other diseases that we have to identify in prisoners: HIV, TB, Hep B, and Hep C. These are rampant in the concentrated, utilized facility. There are some issues that we've seen some questions coming up. When we talk about prisons, there are questions about there are other detention centers that we have not addressed, which have similar problems, like what you said, the lockup, the places of detention, other areas. Are we looking at that?
Definitely, Dato'. I mean, you know, it must be a holistic approach. It cannot be just the prison, the normal prison, because if you think about this, I mean, the remand center for KL is and Selangor is Sungai Buloh, and Sungai Buloh for remand center, it's so full, brim with people. And I mean, during my discussion with some of my clients who have been remanded, they tell me there is no space for them to walk when they are in remand. And imagine, how is that going to be helpful for them? And I just want to add one more thing, is that if you in the prison, definitely HIV and all sorts of diseases are there, right? But one thing that I understand is that whenever the prisoners approach the warden for treatment, the warden acts as a triage. So what happened is that the warden will then, the prison warden will determine, are you okay? Okay, I think you don't need to have medical treatment. And this is the result of having 2 doctors in the prison system. I mean, you think about it, you have maybe about 5,000 in a particular prison, and every day, how many patients can the doctor see? And the dangerous thing is that the prison warden is making the determination whether they're serious or not. And I remember when I was representing a client who had a huge boils on her hand, and it's so big. And every time for the 6 months that I was seeing her in court, it was still there. And I asked her, how come the prison authority is not doing anything? The doctor said it's not necessary yet. I mean, it's so huge, like this big. I mean, you know, it's just, you know, what can we do, right? It's just mind-boggling. I mean, you know, I mean, I mean, if we are here, outside here with that kind of boils, we're definitely going to say, I need to see a doctor now. I want a treatment now. But because they are so, their voice cannot be heard, what can they say? They just accept it as part of life.
That is what I was saying just now, that even if a doctor was allowed to see this kind of patients, their treatment would be subtherapeutic.
Yeah.
They'll be given antibiotics, but not the full course of antibiotics, maybe the wrong antibiotics.
Yeah.
And the bacteria that he's carrying would be resistant to a lot of drugs. And he may be partially treated. And when he's released, he go back into the community. And this is a health scare which people have not looked at it.
Absolutely. Not just that, Dato', I just want to add one more thing, is that the mental health issues is real. Because in prison, you know, not a lot of people can deal with the fact that they are being confined to spaces, and what prison does, it triggers mental health issues. Those people from outside who come inside, they will suffer tremendously. And a lot of them suffer in silence. And I know that there are some people who actually have attempted suicide because they can't deal with these issues. And again, mental health professional definitely is not there because they don't, you know, I mean, there's no budget for that. So
you don't have enough mental health personnel in the first place.
No, yeah, they don't have. I mean, unless you are borderline insane or severe mental health issues, then only you'll be sent to centers like Tanjung Rambutan or Tampoy. So you can see it creates a lot of problem. And, you know, this is where I want to say, when we don't deal with the prisoners in a very dignified way, how are we going to say ourselves that we are a civilized people? It is, you know, it is like, we can't ignore them. We all need to be together and, you know, push for reform because it is a reflection of us as a society.
I know, like what you said just now, this is a big avenue to do research into, but we do not have enough finance to fund research.
Yeah.
But if people look at prison from a health point of view, there's a lot that can be done. It can become a subspecialty on its own. And maybe the Ministry of Health should look into it and put some money for research. We know Prof. Adiba has done quite a bit of research in prison health. And because she had some funds, she produced very good results and she was published in Lancet Journal a few years ago. But since the funds stopped, she cannot do anything anymore.
Not just that, Dato'. I think sometimes we do get offer from overseas to do research. But the difficulty is this. The difficulty is this: is that the government is not willing to allow fund from abroad to actually to undertake the research locally. And what is important is access. I mean, we need to have access to prison to do research, do proper research, so that people understand the issue, and then with that understanding, you can provide a very holistic kind of remedy rather than, you know, a very piecemeal approach. So we do need a proper reform when we look at the entire healthcare system, because as I said, you're right about Prof. Adiba. I mean, she's doing a wonderful job, but I think with lack of funding, and I think this is where the Ministry of Health must come in, because they cannot, you know, talk about health issue without looking at the health situation in prison, because they are the authority and they can actually do real work. And as you're right, subspecialty, I mean, we can develop expertise in that. I mean, and work with universities in Malaysia and increase our capacity. And I think there are a lot of things to be researched in Southeast Asian prison. I mean, this is, you know, I mean, it's not just for the prisoners, it's also beneficial for the medical fraternity as well in terms of development.
So I think maybe the universities should start looking into making marginalized society as a subspecialty in social preventive medicine. And once you develop that as a subspecialty, there'll be more doctors to join. I mean, at the moment, we have a lot of doctors who are unemployed. I do not see how we can say that we don't have doctors to treat prisoners.
I just want to add one more thing, Dato. I mean, you know, sometimes when I represent death row prisoners, what happens is that sometimes I want to, I have difficulty in looking for mental health trained mental health professionals who are willing to actually take up the cases to advise me. But more importantly, sometimes the prison authority also not amenable to having a private mental health you know, professional to come in and to examine them. And there's so many obstacles. I mean, you know, I think we do need to allow this kind of breathing space for medical fraternity to grow.
I think you have to change the perception, like what you say, doctors who are being sent to prison to treat patients, look at it as a punishment.
Absolutely.
So if we can change that attitude in the first place to say that it is not punishment, it's a lot of a new area that is going to develop that they can get involved in, and they can further the advances of medicine and society, that would be looked at from a different angle. With that, I thank you very much, Encik Rashid.
Thank you. Thank you, Dato'. Thank you for having me. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.